She sold the night to pay for surgery, and never imagined what her boss would do afterwards. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The rhythmic beeping of medical monitors had become a familiar melody to Caroline Ellis. She sat in the sterile hospital room, watching her younger sister Jade sleep, the morning sun casting gentle shadows through the half-drawn blinds. Caroline's fingers absently traced the edge of another medical bill, the numbers swimming before her tired eyes. 29 years old, and she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The coffee from the hospital vending machine had gone cold beside her, untouched like the protein bar she'd grabbed on her way out of her apartment at dawn. "You're here early again," Nurse Martinez commented softly as she entered to check Jade's vitals. The older woman's eyes held a mixture of compassion and concern. "The doctors won't start rounds for another hour." Caroline managed a small smile, adjusting her box braids into a neater bun. "I wanted to be here when she wakes up. She gets anxious in the mornings sometimes." As if on cue, Jade stirred, her eyes fluttering open. At 22, she looked impossibly young in the hospital bed, her vibrant spirit somehow undimmed by the tubes and wires surrounding her. "Hey sis," she whispered, her voice scratchy. "Don't you have work?" "I've got time," Caroline lied, knowing she'd have to rush to make it to the veterinary clinic by 8. She reached for her sister's hand, squeezing gently. "How's the pain today?" "Same old party in my chest," Jade attempted a joke, but Caroline caught the wince she tried to hide. "Did you bring my laptop? I've got this social justice blog post I need to finish." "Rest first, revolution later," Caroline teased, but her mind was already calculating minutes and dollars. The clinic's morning appointments would start soon, and she couldn't afford to be late again, not when she was barely making ends meet as it was. The drive to work was a blur of Atlanta traffic and worry. Caroline parked her old Honda in the employee lot of Riverside Veterinary Clinic, taking a moment to check her reflection in the rearview mirror. She smoothed down her simple navy blouse, straightened her name tag and took a deep breath. Time to put on her professional face. The clinic was already bustling when she walked in. The waiting room held an anxious woman cradling a carrier with a sick cat, while a large dog wagged its tail enthusiastically at anyone who passed by. Caroline moved quickly to her desk, logging into the computer system as she called out morning greetings to her co-workers. "Morning, Caroline." Dr. Miller, one of the junior veterinarians, hurried past with a stack of files. "Mr. Peterson called about rescheduling Buddy's vaccination, and there's the emergency slot that opened up at 10. Caroline nodded, already pulling up the scheduling software. This was her element, organizing chaos, solving problems, keeping everything running smoothly. She'd been at Riverside for 3 years now, and she knew every system, every regular client, every protocol by heart. "The new medication shipment needs to be logged," Anne from reception added, dropping a clipboard on Caroline's desk. "And Dr. Dorian wants the quarterly inventory report by end of day." At the mention of her boss, Caroline's fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second over her keyboard. Dr. Robert Dorian, owner of the clinic, brilliant veterinarian, and the kind of boss who noticed everything while saying very little. She'd seen him perform miracles with injured animals, his tall frame bent over operating tables, those intense grey-blue eyes focused with laser precision behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He was attractive in an understated way that seemed almost accidental, all quiet competence and careful movements, but it was his hands that Caroline found herself watching sometimes, strong, gentle hands that could calm the most frightened animal with a touch. "Caroline?" Anne's voice snapped her back to reality. "Did you hear what I said about the inventory?" "Yes, sorry, I'll have it done today." Caroline forced her thoughts back to the present. She couldn't afford distractions, not with Jade's medical bills piling up and the surgery date looming closer. The morning passed in a whirlwind of appointments, phone calls, and crisis management. Caroline moved through it all with practiced efficiency, though her mind kept drifting to the hospital, to Jade, to the growing stack of bills hidden in her apartment drawer. During her lunch break, instead of eating, she sat in her car with her phone, looking at her banking app. The numbers hadn't magically changed since yesterday. Even with insurance, Jade's surgery would cost more than Caroline could hope to save in time. She'd already picked up extra shifts at a local coffee shop on weekends, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. With trembling fingers, she opened a different app, one she'd downloaded late last night after hours of desperate research. The interface was sleek, professional. Elite companions, it promised. Discreet arrangements for sophisticated clients. Caroline felt sick to her stomach, but she thought of Jade's brave smile this morning, of the pain her sister tried so hard to hide. With a deep breath, she began filling out the profile information. The afternoon brought a rush of emergency cases: a dog who'd eaten chocolate, a cat with a suspected urinary blockage, a parrot with breathing difficulties. Caroline coordinated it all, fitting in urgent cases between regular appointments, ensuring the flow of patients never overwhelmed the veterinarians. She was so focused on her work that she didn't notice Dr. Dorian watching her from his office doorway. When she finally looked up, their eyes met for a brief moment. He nodded slightly, a gesture of approval that shouldn't have made her heart skip a beat, but did. "You handled the emergencies well today," he said quietly as he passed her desk later, his voice carrying that slight southern drawl that softened his words. "Thank you." Caroline managed a professional smile, ignoring the warmth that spread through her chest at his praise. "Just doing my job, Dr. Dorian." As the day wound down, Caroline finished the inventory report and emailed it to him. She gathered her things, her phone feeling heavy in her pocket with the dating app she'd signed up for. Tomorrow night she had her first appointment. The thought made her nauseous, but she pushed the feeling down. She'd do anything for Jade. Anything. Walking to her car in the gathering dusk, Caroline looked back at the clinic. Through the window she could see Dr. Dorian still at his desk, his broad shoulders bent over paperwork, the warm office light creating a halo around his figure. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she wasn't drowning in responsibility, where she could notice the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, where she could be just a woman attracted to a kind, intelligent man. But that wasn't her reality. Her reality was a sick sister, mounting bills and choices that made her soul ache. Starting her car, Caroline pushed away thoughts of Robert Dorian's gentle hands and understanding eyes. Tomorrow night, she would do what needed to be done. For Jade. Always for Jade. As she drove home through the Atlanta night, R&B classics playing softly on the radio, Caroline Ellis held onto her strength like a shield. She didn't know that tomorrow would change everything, that sometimes love arrives in the moments we least expect it, in the silence between heartbeats, in the space between who we are and who we think we have to be. Caroline stood before her bedroom mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down the black dress she'd bought years ago for a friend's wedding. The fabric still fit perfectly against her curves, but wearing it tonight felt like putting on someone else's skin. She'd styled her hair in loose, elegant curls falling past her shoulders, a departure from her usual practical bun or braids. The notification from the Elite Companions app had come during her lunch break. A client for tonight, offering enough money to cover a significant portion of Jade's medical bills. The address was in Midtown Atlanta, in one of those luxury apartment buildings she passed every day on her commute, but never imagined entering. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jade. "Done with physical therapy. The nurse said I did great today. Love you, sis." Caroline closed her eyes, letting the message strengthen her resolve. She could do this. One night, one stranger, one step closer to saving her sister's life. She'd left work early, telling Anne she had a doctor's appointment. Dr. Dorian hadn't been in the office, some conference call about new medical equipment, and she was grateful. Somehow, his absence made it easier to walk out those doors, knowing what she planned to do. The Uber dropped her off in front of the gleaming high-rise at exactly 8 p.m. The doorman nodded politely as she entered the lobby, her heels clicking against the marble floor. In the elevator, Caroline checked the apartment number again, 1505. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. The hallway seemed endless, each step bringing her closer to a point of no return. 1501, 1503, 1505. Caroline took a deep breath, adjusting her small clutch purse. The apartment door was solid wood, expensive, intimidating. Before she could lose her nerve, she pressed the doorbell. Time seemed to slow down. She heard footsteps approaching, measured and unhurried. The lock clicked. The door opened, and Caroline's world stopped spinning. Robert Dorian stood in the doorway, wearing dark slacks and a crisp white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the light, but she could see the exact moment recognition dawned in his grey-blue eyes. Neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, heavy with shock and impossible coincidence. Caroline felt the blood drain from her face. Her boss. Of all the men in Atlanta, she'd been matched with her boss, the man who signed her paychecks, the man she'd secretly watched perform surgery with those skilled hands. the man who'd praised her work just yesterday. She should run. Every rational thought screamed at her to turn around, to flee, to pretend this never happened. But her feet remained frozen to the spot, her mind blank, except for one thought. She needed this money. Jade needed this money. Robert's expression was unreadable, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the doorframe. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled. Caroline, just her name. Not a question, not an accusation. Just her name, spoken with a complexity of emotion she couldn't begin to untangle. "Dr. Dorian," she managed to whisper, her own voice sounding distant and strange. I should go." But before she could turn, he stepped back slightly, a gesture so subtle she almost missed it, an invitation, a choice. Caroline's heart thundered in her chest as she stood on the threshold of something that would change everything. In that moment, she thought of Jade in her hospital bed, of bills piling up, of the weight she'd carried alone for so long. She thought of Robert's gentle hands healing injured animals, of his quiet presence that had always made her feel somehow safer. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. His apartment was exactly what she might have expected, had she ever allowed herself to imagine it. Clean lines, comfortable furniture in muted colors, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the Atlanta skyline. Books lined one wall, medical texts mixed with classic literature. A record player sat in one corner, vinyl albums neatly organized beside it. Robert closed the door with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence. When Caroline turned to face him, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Would you like a drink?" he asked, his southern drawl more pronounced than usual, betraying his own tension. Caroline nodded, grateful for the momentary reprieve from the weight of his gaze. She watched as he moved to a small bar cart, his movements precise and controlled. The clink of glass against glass was oddly grounding. "Why?" The question came softly as he handed her a glass of what smelled like expensive bourbon. Caroline's fingers tightened around the glass. "My sister," she said simply, knowing he'd seen the hospital paperwork for her insurance changes. "The surgery. It's more than I can—" She trailed off as understanding dawned in his eyes. Of course he knew about Jade's condition. He'd signed the forms for Caroline's adjusted schedule to accommodate hospital visits, but knowing was different from understanding, and in that moment, something shifted in his expression. "And this was your solution?" His voice held no judgment, only a complexity of emotion that made Caroline's chest ache. "It was the only solution I could find," she whispered, honesty burning in her throat like the bourbon she hadn't touched. Robert set his own glass down untasted. He took a step toward her, then stopped, as if unsure of his right to move closer. "You could have come to me, to the clinic. We have programs for employees in need." "I didn't want charity," Caroline interrupted, lifting her chin slightly. "I didn't want to be pitied or—" "Is this better?" he asked softly, gesturing to the space between them. "Being here like this?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Caroline felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "No," she admitted, "but it was my choice, my way of being strong." Something flickered in Robert's eyes, pain, understanding, or perhaps both. He moved then, closing the distance between them slowly, deliberately. His hand rose to her face, hovering just shy of touching her cheek. "You're the strongest person I know, Caroline Ellis, but you don't have to be strong alone." The gentleness in his voice undid her. A tear slipped down her cheek, and this time, when his thumb brushed it away, she didn't pull back. His touch was warm, careful, exactly like she'd imagined in her most secret thoughts. "We can't," she whispered, even as she leaned slightly into his touch. "You're my boss. This is complicated." "Life is complicated," Robert replied, his other hand coming to rest lightly on her waist. "But some things are simple. Let me help, Caroline, not as your boss, not as this, just as someone who cares." Caroline looked up into his eyes, seeing past the professional distance he usually maintained. She saw concern, attraction, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "I don't know how to accept help," she admitted. "I've been handling everything alone for so long." "Then let that be the first thing we figure out together," he said softly, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Caroline felt something shift in her universe. A wall crumbling, a door opening, a possibility she'd never allowed herself to consider becoming real. Robert's phone buzzed on the counter, making them both jump slightly. The spell broke, reality rushing back in. Caroline stepped back, suddenly aware of how intimate their position had become. "I should go," she said, setting down her untouched drink. We need to think about this." Robert nodded, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of uncertainty. "Let me call you a car." "No," Caroline said quickly. I need to walk a bit, clear my head." He watched her gather her clutch, concern evident in his expression. "Text me when you get home safely." When she looked surprised, he added quietly, "Please." At the door, Caroline paused. "What happens tomorrow? At work?" "Whatever you want to happen," Robert replied, his voice steady. "We can pretend this never happened if that's what you need, or we can figure out a better way forward. Together." Caroline nodded, unable to trust her voice. As she walked to the elevator, she felt his eyes on her until the doors closed. In the mirrored walls she caught her reflection. Same black dress, same careful curls. But something had changed. In her eyes, she saw a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Outside, the Atlanta night was warm and alive with possibility. Caroline walked slowly, her heels clicking against the sidewalk, her mind replaying every moment of the evening. Nothing had happened the way she'd planned. Nothing had changed in her practical reality. Jade still needed surgery, the bills still needed to be paid, but something had shifted in her heart, in the space between who she was and who she could be. Robert's words echoed in her mind. "You don't have to be strong alone." Maybe, just maybe, that was enough of a start. Caroline arrived at Riverside Veterinary Clinic exactly 17 minutes earlier than usual, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold during her 20-minute drive. She'd barely slept, replaying last night's encounter over and over in her mind. Her usual neat bun felt too tight, every nerve ending hyper-aware as she unlocked the clinic's front door. The familiar smell of antiseptic and pet shampoo normally calmed her, but today it only heightened her anxiety. She'd texted Robert last night as promised. A simple home safe that he'd answered with a single heart emoji. That tiny red symbol had kept her awake for hours, wondering what it meant, what any of this meant. The morning light filtered through the clinic's windows as she began her opening routine, turning on computers, checking the answering machine, reviewing the day's appointments. She'd done this hundreds of times before, but today every action felt different, charged with new meaning. A sound from the back door made her freeze. Heavy footsteps. She'd know them anywhere. Robert always came in through the back entrance, always arrived early on Wednesdays to review cases before the morning rush. "Good morning." His voice was soft, professional, but something in it made her skin tingle. Caroline turned slowly, finding him standing in the doorway to her office area. He looked impeccable in his white coat, glasses catching the morning light, but she noticed small details she'd never allowed herself to see before. The slight shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his tie was knotted just slightly crooked. "Good morning, Dr. Dorian," she managed, proud of how steady her voice sounded. He stepped closer, setting a paper cup on her desk. The rich aroma of fresh coffee, her favorite blend from the local shop near his apartment, filled the air between them. "I thought you might need this." The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. Caroline stared at the cup, remembering how his hands had almost touched her face last night, how gentle his voice had been. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up to meet his eyes. The morning light made them more blue than grey, and she saw the same uncertainty she felt reflected there. "Caroline, about last night." The front door chimed as Anne burst in, her arms full of files. "Morning. Oh good, you're both here. The Hendersons called about their German shepherd. Apparently he ate something weird again." Just like that, the workday swept them up. Caroline fell into her usual rhythm of scheduling, phone calls and crisis management, but everything felt different. She was acutely aware of Robert's presence throughout the day, the brush of his lab coat as he passed her desk, the sound of his voice discussing cases with other staff members, the weight of his gaze when he thought no one was looking. During lunch break, Caroline escaped to the small staff room, needing a moment alone. She hadn't touched her sandwich when the door opened quietly. "You should eat something," Robert said, closing the door behind him. They were alone for the first time since last night, and the air seemed to crackle with unspoken words. "I'm not very hungry," she admitted, watching as he took the seat across from her. The small table between them felt like both a barrier and a bridge. "Jade called the clinic this morning," he said carefully. "She was worried when she couldn't reach your cell." Caroline's hand flew to her phone. Dead. She'd forgotten to charge it last night. "Oh God, I need to—" "I told her you were in with a patient," Robert interrupted gently. She said to tell you her morning tests went well. The kindness in his voice made her throat tight. Thank you, she whispered, then added, for everything, for last night, for being Caroline. The way he said her name made her look up. His eyes were intense behind his glasses. We need to talk about this, about how to move forward. She nodded, twisting her hands in her lap. I know. But I don't know how. You're my boss, and I almost... You did nothing wrong, he said firmly. You were trying to help your sister, and He paused, choosing his words carefully. I was lonely, had been for a long time. When I signed up for that app, I was looking for connection, I suppose. I never expected... A knock at the door made them both jump. Dr. Miller poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got an emergency coming in. Dog with possible bloat. Robert stood immediately, professional mask sliding back into place. But before he left, he looked at Caroline one last time. Eat something, please. The afternoon brought a parade of pets and their worried owners. Caroline handled it all with her usual efficiency, but her mind kept drifting to the unfinished conversation in the break room. Every time Robert passed her desk, she felt the weight of words unsaid. At 4 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Jade's condition had worsened slightly. She was stable, but they were adjusting her medication. Caroline felt the familiar panic rising in her chest, the walls of her carefully controlled world threatening to close in. She must have made some small sound because suddenly Robert was there, standing by her desk with concern etched on his features. What's wrong? Jade, she managed to say, showing him the text. Without a word, he took the phone, read the message, then handed it back. Go, he said softly. I'll cover for you here. But the evening appointments are less important than your sister. His voice was gentle but firm. Go, Caroline. Take care of her. She gathered her things quickly, aware of his presence behind her, steady and reassuring. At the door, she turned to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. He was looking at her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. Text me later? He asked quietly. Let me know how she's doing? Caroline nodded, unable to speak. As she walked to her car, she felt his eyes following her, protecting her, caring for her in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. The drive to the hospital was a blur of worry and confusion, but underneath it all there was something new, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry all this weight alone anymore. In Jade's hospital room, her sister was sleeping peacefully, the new medication already helping. Caroline sank into the familiar chair beside the bed, taking her sister's hand. On the bedside table, someone had left a fresh vase of flowers, simple daisies, Jade's favorite. The card read simply, "Thinking of you both." Sir Caroline touched one of the soft petals, remembering how Robert's hands had almost touched her face last night, how he'd brought her coffee this morning, how he'd let her go without question when she needed to be here. Small gestures, quiet care, silent love. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. She'll be okay. You'll be okay. You're not alone anymore. Outside the hospital window, Atlanta's lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Caroline held her sister's hand and let herself believe, for the first time in a long time, that tomorrow might be better than today. Rain drummed against the clinic's windows, turning Atlanta's streets into mirrors of reflected streetlights. Caroline sat at her desk, finishing the last of her paperwork as evening settled over the city. Most of the staff had already left, seeking shelter from the storm, but she lingered, using work as an excuse to avoid another lonely night at her apartment. The past week had been a dance of careful glances and purposeful distance between her and Robert. Every morning a fresh coffee appeared on her desk, sometimes with a note about a patient, sometimes just her name written in his precise handwriting. Every evening they exchanged texts about Jade's condition, his responses always thoughtful, always caring. Lightning flashed outside, followed by a loud crack of thunder that made Caroline jump. From the treatment area, she heard a chorus of worried barks from the overnight patients. They don't like storms either. Robert's voice came from behind her, making her heart skip. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, his white coat gone, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked softer in the dim evening light, more like the man from his apartment than Dr. Dorian the veterinarian. I should check on them, Caroline said, starting to rise, but he shook his head. He already did. They're all settled now. He moved closer, perching on the edge of her desk, close enough that she could smell his subtle cologne mixed with the antiseptic scent of the clinic. You should head home before the weather gets worse. Caroline glanced at her phone. No new messages from the hospital. Jade's having tests tonight. I thought I'd wait for the results here. Understanding softened his features. "Have you eaten?" She shook her head, realizing she'd missed lunch again. Robert straightened, making a decision. "Come on, I know a place." 20 minutes later, they sat in a small Thai restaurant 3 blocks from the clinic. The rain continued outside, but inside it was warm and cozy, string lights casting a soft glow over their corner booth. Caroline wrapped her hands around a steaming bowl of tom yum soup, letting the spicy aroma chase away the chill. "How did you find this place?" she asked, watching as Robert expertly manipulated his chopsticks. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Would you believe me if I said I followed a stray cat?" "Really?" He nodded, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "She was limping. I thought she might need help. She led me here, where the owner had been feeding her. Turned out she just had a thorn in her paw." He paused, taking a sip of his tea. "The cat got better, and I got a new favorite restaurant." Caroline found herself smiling, a real smile, the kind that had been rare lately. "You really do care about every animal you meet, don't you?" "Not just animals," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. Jade's test results. Caroline's hands shook slightly as she read the message. "Her numbers are better," she breathed, relief washing over her. "The new medication is working." Robert's hand covered hers on the table, warm and steady. "That's wonderful news." She looked at their joined hands, feeling the gentle strength in his touch. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. The flowers, the coffee, the way you've been so understanding about my schedule." "Caroline," his voice was soft but serious. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, finding them full of emotion behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "I care about you," he said simply. "Not as my employee, not because of that night. I care about you because you're the strongest, most compassionate person I've ever met, because you put everyone else first, without expecting anything in return, because even when you're drowning, you make sure everyone around you can breathe." Tears pricked at Caroline's eyes. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "How to let someone else care about me. How to need someone." "Then let me show you," he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "No pressure, no expectations. Just let me be here." The waiter approached with their entrees, and they fell into comfortable conversation about safer topics, clinic stories, favorite books, childhood memories. Robert told her about growing up in rural Georgia with his grandparents, about the old farm dog who'd inspired him to become a vet. Caroline shared stories about raising Jade, about their mother who'd passed too young, about learning to be both sister and parent. As they talked, the rain eased outside and something shifted in the space between them. The careful distance they'd maintained began to blur, replaced by something warmer, more real. When the check came, Robert reached for it without hesitation. "Please," he said when she started to protest, "let me do this." "People might talk," she said softly. "If they see us together like this." "Let them," he replied, but his eyes were gentle. "We're not doing anything wrong, Caroline. We are just 2 people having dinner." But they both knew it was more than that. It was in the way his hand lingered when he helped her with her coat, in how closely he walked beside her as they made their way back to their cars, in the soft brush of his fingers against her cheek when they said goodnight. Back home, Caroline stood at her apartment window, watching the last of the rain fall. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Thank you for sharing dinner with me. And Caroline, you deserve to be cared for too." She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, letting out a shaky breath. On her coffee table, unpaid bills sat in a neat stack, reminding her of all the reasons this was complicated. But her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks, and when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the warmth of his hand in hers. In the hospital across town, Jade slept peacefully, her vital signs strong and steady. On her bedside table, the daisies Robert had sent were still fresh, their simple beauty a reminder that sometimes the most powerful gestures are the quietest ones. Caroline's phone buzzed again, a photo from Robert this time. One of the clinic's cats had curled up in his office chair, fast asleep. "She misses you," the message read, followed by another. "So do I." 3 simple words that somehow held the weight of everything changing, everything possible, everything she'd been afraid to want. Caroline hugged herself, remembering how it felt to sit across from him, to share stories and silence, to let someone else carry part of her burden. "I miss you too," she typed back, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the full truth of those words. The emergency call came at 6:15 a.m., just as Caroline was getting ready for work. A car accident involving a family and their dog. The humans were at Atlanta General, but the injured golden retriever was being rushed to Riverside Clinic. Without thinking, she called Robert. "I'll meet you there," he said immediately, his voice still rough with sleep. "Call Dr. Miller for backup." The sunrise painted Atlanta's skyline in shades of pink and gold as Caroline hurried into the clinic. She found Robert already there, preparing the treatment room, his movements quick and precise. Their eyes met briefly as she entered, and something unspoken passed between them. They could do this together. The dog arrived minutes later, carried by a tearful teenage neighbor, 8-year-old Luna, golden fur matted with blood, whimpering softly. While Robert began his examination, Caroline gathered information. The family, parents and 2 young children, had been taken to the same hospital where Jade was staying. "Multiple lacerations, possible internal bleeding," Robert murmured, his hands gentle as they moved over Luna's body. "We need to operate now." The next few hours passed in a blur of focused intensity. Caroline assisted in surgery, handling instruments, monitoring vitals, working in perfect sync with Robert. She'd assisted in surgeries before, but this felt different. There was a rhythm between them now, an understanding that went beyond words. Luna's surgery was successful, but complicated. When they finally emerged from the operating room, exhausted but relieved, the morning sun had given way to afternoon clouds. "You were amazing in there," Robert said softly as they washed up, his shoulder brushing against hers at the sink. "I learned from the best," Caroline replied, trying to ignore how her skin tingled at his proximity. "Caroline," he turned to face her, still close enough that she could see droplets of water clinging to his forearms. "Would you have dinner with me tonight? A real dinner, not just takeout at the clinic." Before she could answer, her phone rang. The hospital. Her heart stopped when she saw the number. "Jade?" Robert asked, noting her expression. Caroline nodded, answering quickly. "Hello, yes, this is her sister." Robert watched as the color drained from her face. Without a word, he moved closer, his hand finding the small of her back, supporting her as she listened. "I understand," she said finally, her voice shaking. "I'll be right there." She ended the call, turning to face Robert with wide, frightened eyes. Jade's numbers dropped suddenly. "They're moving up her surgery date. Tomorrow morning. I'll drive you," he said immediately, already reaching for his keys. "But Luna, the clinic, Dr. Miller can handle it. You're not doing this alone, remember?" The drive to the hospital was quiet, but Robert's presence beside her was like an anchor in a storm. At a red light, he reached over and took her hand, interlacing their fingers. Caroline held on tight, drawing strength from his touch. In Jade's room, they found her looking smaller than usual against the white hospital sheets, but her smile was bright when she saw them. "Hey sis and Dr. D, nice to finally meet you in person." Caroline hadn't even realized Robert had followed her into the room, but now she was grateful for his steady presence behind her. "Your flowers really brightened up this boring room," Jade continued, gesturing to the fresh daisies on her bedside table. "Caroline talks about you all the time, you know." "Jade!" Caroline felt her cheeks warm. "What? It's true. Every day it's, Dr. Dorian did this or Dr. Dorian said that." Robert's chuckle was soft and warm. "All good things, I hope." "The best," Jade said with a knowing smile, then winced slightly. Caroline was by her side instantly. "Are you in pain? Should I call the nurse?" "I'm okay," Jade assured her, but her voice was weaker. "Just tired. They've got me on all kinds of pre-surgery stuff." The doctor came in then to discuss the procedure, and Caroline felt her anxiety rising with each detailed explanation. Robert stayed through it all, his professional knowledge helping to translate medical terms, his quiet strength keeping her grounded. When Jade finally fell asleep, Caroline stood by the window watching the city lights come on as dusk approached. Robert joined her, close enough that their arms touched. "I'm scared," she whispered, admitting what she hadn't been able to say to anyone else. Without a word, Robert turned her gently to face him, pulling her into his arms. For the first time since this nightmare began, Caroline let herself break. She buried her face in his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt as his arms held her tight. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "You're not alone in this." They stayed like that for a long moment, the steady beat of his heart against her ear becoming a comfort she didn't know she needed. When she finally pulled back slightly, his hands came up to frame her face, thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "Stay with me tonight," he said softly. "Not like, let me take care of you. You shouldn't be alone." Caroline looked up into his eyes, seeing all the things he wasn't saying, the worry, the care, the growing feelings neither of them had named yet. "Okay," she whispered. They stopped at her apartment so she could pack a small bag, then drove to his place in comfortable silence. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights, and Caroline felt something settling in her chest. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. Whatever tomorrow brought, she didn't have to face it alone. Robert's apartment was exactly as she remembered it, but this time she wasn't here as a stranger. This time, when he made her tea in the kitchen, it felt natural. When they sat together on his comfortable couch, her head resting on his shoulder as they talked softly about everything and nothing, it felt right. "Tell me something good," she murmured, as the night grew late, fatigue making her edges soft. "Luna's family called while you were talking to Jade's doctor," he said, his fingers playing gently with her curls. "Everyone's going to be okay. The kids just had minor injuries. Parents are stable. Luna will need some recovery time, but she'll heal." Caroline smiled, remembering how in sync they'd been during the surgery. "We make a good team." "We do," he agreed, then added softly, "in every way." She tilted her head up to look at him, finding his eyes already on her, warm and sure. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. When he finally kissed her, it was gentle, a whisper of a kiss, giving her every chance to pull away. But Caroline leaned in, her hand coming up to cup his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of evening stubble under her palm. The kiss deepened slowly, tenderly, speaking all the words they hadn't said yet. When they finally parted, Robert rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing softly in the quiet room. "Stay," he whispered again, and this time she knew he meant more than just tonight. "I'm already here," she answered, and felt his smile against her lips as he kissed her again. Later, as she drifted to sleep in his guest room, wrapped in sheets that smelled like lavender, Caroline felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. Tomorrow would bring its challenges: Jade's surgery, the reality of their changing relationship, the complications of work and life and love. But for now, in this quiet moment between one day and the next, she was exactly where she needed to be. Her phone buzzed one last time, a text from Robert just down the hall. "Sweet dreams, Caroline. Tomorrow, we face everything together." She fell asleep, smiling, holding those words close to her heart like a promise. Dawn crept through the windows of Atlanta General Hospital, painting the waiting room walls in shades of pale gold. Caroline sat perfectly still, her hands wrapped around a cup of hospital coffee she hadn't tasted, watching the minutes tick by on the wall clock. 6:47 a.m. 13 minutes until they would take Jade into surgery. Robert sat beside her, his thigh pressed against hers, a steady warmth in the cold hospital air. He hadn't left her side since they'd arrived at 5:30, his presence both an anchor and a comfort. He'd taken the day off from the clinic, arranging coverage without hesitation. "Oh, you should drink that," he said softly, nodding at her untouched coffee. "It's going to be a long morning." Caroline managed a weak smile, taking a small sip. The coffee was terrible, but the action gave her something to focus on besides the knot of fear in her stomach. "Thank you for being here." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally. "There's nowhere else I'd be." The quiet moment was interrupted by a nurse calling them to Jade's room for final preparations. They found her already prepped for surgery, her usual vibrant energy subdued by pre-op medications, but her smile still bright when she saw them. "Look at you two," Jade mumbled sleepily, gesturing between them, all coupley and cute. Caroline felt her cheeks warm, but Robert's hand tightened reassuringly around hers. They hadn't discussed labels or definitions for what was growing between them, but in this moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was being here, being together, being strong for Jade. "The surgery will take about 6 hours, the nurse explained, checking Jade's vitals one last time. "Dr. Patel will update you periodically." Caroline leaned down to kiss her sister's forehead. "I love you," she whispered, fighting back tears. "Love you too, sis," Jade replied, then added with a mischievous glint in her eye, "Take care of her, Dr. D. She forgets to eat when she's worried." "I will," Robert promised solemnly, and Caroline heard everything he wasn't saying in those two simple words. Watching them wheel Jade away was the hardest thing Caroline had ever done. Her legs threatened to give out, but Robert's arm slipped around her waist, holding her up. Without a word, he guided her to a quiet corner of the waiting room, away from other anxious families. "Talk to me," he said softly, "about anything. Tell me about Jade when she was little." So she did. She told him about teaching 5-year-old Jade to ride a bike, about their mother's last Christmas, when they all made gingerbread houses that looked more like abstract art, about Jade's first protest rally where she made a sign too big to carry. Robert listened, asked questions, kept her anchored in memories instead of fear. The hours crawled by. Robert made sure she ate something from the cafeteria, brought her water when the coffee made her jittery, and never once let go of her hand. Around hour 3, Dr. Patel came with an update. Everything was proceeding as planned. "She's strong," Robert murmured as they watched the doctor leave. Like her sister. Caroline turned into his embrace then, letting his solid presence comfort her. "I don't feel strong right now." "Strength isn't about not being afraid," he said, his voice rumbling in his chest where her head rested. "It's about facing the fear and doing what needs to be done anyway. You've been doing that every day since I met you." She pulled back slightly to look at him, really look at him. His wire-rimmed glasses couldn't hide the tenderness in his eyes, and his usual professional demeanor had softened into something more vulnerable, more real. "When did you know?" she asked quietly. That we? "The first time I saw you calm a frightened dog at the clinic," he answered without hesitation. "You got down on the floor in your nice clothes, speaking so softly, so patiently. You didn't care about looking professional or maintaining distance. You just cared about helping." He paused, brushing a curl from her face. "I think I fell a little bit in love with you that day." Caroline's breath caught at the word love, but before she could respond, another doctor appeared in the waiting room. They both tensed, but he headed toward a different family. "I'm scared of this too," Robert admitted softly. "Not just about Jade's surgery, but about us, about how much I feel for you, how quickly everything changed, about crossing lines at work, about what people might say." He took a deep breath. "But I'm more scared of not trying, of letting fear stop something that feels this right." Caroline reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of his morning stubble. "I'm scared too," she whispered, "but not of this, not of us." He turned his head to kiss her palm, and the tender gesture nearly undid her. They sat in comfortable silence after that, both lost in thought but anchored by touch, his thumb tracing patterns on her hand, her head resting on his shoulder. At hour 5, Dr. Patel returned with news that made Caroline's heart soar. The surgery was going better than expected. Jade's heart was responding well to the procedure. "See?" Robert said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "She's going to be fine." "You both are." The final hour was the longest. Caroline paced, unable to sit still any longer. Robert matched her steps, a quiet guardian, ready to catch her if she fell. When Dr. Patel finally appeared with a smile on his face, Caroline gripped Robert's hand so tight it must have hurt, but he didn't flinch. "The surgery was a complete success," Dr. Patel announced. "She's in recovery now. You can see her in about an hour." Caroline's legs did give out then, relief making her knees weak. Robert caught her, pulling her into a tight embrace as she cried. Happy tears this time, tears of gratitude and release and joy. "She made it," she kept whispering against his chest. "She's okay." "You both made it," he corrected gently, holding her close. "And I'm not going anywhere." Later, when they were allowed into Jade's recovery room, Caroline felt a profound shift in her universe. Her sister looked pale but peaceful, monitors showing strong, steady rhythms. Robert stood just inside the doorway, giving them space but remaining close enough that Caroline could still feel his presence like a warm current in the air. "You know," Jade mumbled, still groggy from anesthesia, "he looked at you like that the first time he came to bring flowers, like you're the sun or something." Caroline glanced back at Robert, catching the soft smile on his face. "Get some rest, troublemaker," she told her sister fondly. "Only if you promise to be happy," Jade insisted, fighting sleep. "You deserve it, Car. You deserve everything." As Jade drifted off, Caroline felt Robert's arms slip around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his chest. They stood together, watching Jade sleep, the beeping monitors creating a lullaby of life and hope. "She's right," Robert murmured in her ear. "You deserve everything." Caroline turned in his arms, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. "I already have everything I need," she whispered against his lips. "Right here." Outside the hospital window, Atlanta's afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of promise, and for the first time in years, Caroline felt truly, completely whole. 1 week after Jade's surgery, Caroline stood in the kitchen of her apartment, surrounded by the warm aroma of baking mac and cheese, her sister's favorite comfort food. Jade was coming home today, and everything had to be perfect. The countertops gleamed, fresh flowers brightened the living room, and Caroline had transformed the spare room into a cozy recovery space. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Need any help? I can come early." A smile tugged at her lips as she typed back, "Just finishing up the cooking, but I wouldn't say no to seeing you sooner." The past week had been a whirlwind of hospital visits, work at the clinic, and stolen moments with Robert. He'd seamlessly woven himself into her life, bringing coffee during morning hospital visits, handling the clinic schedule so she could leave early, and somehow always knowing exactly when she needed a quiet moment of support. The doorbell rang just as she was pulling the mac and cheese from the oven. She opened the door to find Robert holding a gift bag and wearing casual clothes, jeans, and a soft grey sweater that made his eyes look stormy. It still caught her off guard sometimes, seeing him outside his professional attire looking so touchable. "Hi," she breathed, and his smile made her heart flutter. "Hi yourself," he replied, stepping inside. He set the bag down to pull her into a gentle kiss, one that tasted of coffee and promises. "Something smells amazing." "Jade's favorite," Caroline explained, leading him to the kitchen. "What's in the bag?" "Just a little welcome home gift." His arms slipped around her waist from behind as she checked the food. "How are you holding up?" Caroline leaned back against his chest, letting out a long breath. Excited, nervous, grateful, she turned in his embrace to face him. "Thank you for everything this past week. I don't know how I would have—" He silenced her with a soft kiss. "You don't have to thank me for caring about you, Caroline." The moment was interrupted by another text. The neighbor who'd volunteered to pick up Jade was 5 minutes away. Caroline bustled around the kitchen, putting finishing touches on everything, while Robert watched with amused affection. "You know she won't care if everything isn't perfect," he said gently. "I know, but—" Caroline paused, vulnerability crossing her face. "This is the first time I can really take care of her. No more worrying about hospital bills or surgeries, just being her sister again." Robert's expression softened. He'd insisted on helping with the remaining hospital bills, presenting it not as charity, but as an investment in their shared future. The conversation had been long and emotional, ending with Caroline finally accepting that letting someone help didn't make her any less strong. The sound of voices in the hallway made them both turn. Moments later, Jade was wheeled through the door by their neighbor, looking tired but radiant. Her face lit up when she saw them. "My favorite sister and my favorite future brother-in-law," she announced, making both Caroline and Robert blush. "Is that mac and cheese I smell?" The afternoon passed in a warm blur of comfort food, gentle laughter, and easy conversation. Robert fit into their dynamic perfectly, his dry humor matching Jade's wit, his medical knowledge helping explain her recovery plan, his presence making their small apartment feel more like home than it ever had. "Open your gift," he encouraged after they'd eaten, pushing the bag toward Jade. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the cover and a set of expensive art pens. "For all those social justice manifestos you're planning," he explained with a smile. Jade's eyes welled up. "How did you know I love to write?" "Caroline talks about you all the time," he said simply, his hand finding Caroline's on the couch between them. "I pay attention." Later, after Jade had settled into her room for a nap, Caroline and Robert stood doing dishes together, moving in perfect sync. She washed, he dried, and the domestic simplicity of it made her throat tight with emotion. "Stay for dinner?" she asked, passing him a plate. "Try to make me leave," he replied, and the warmth in his voice wrapped around her like a blanket. They ended up on her small balcony as evening settled over Atlanta, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the city lights come alive. Caroline sat between Robert's legs, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her. "I love you," she said quietly, the words slipping out as naturally as breathing. She felt him go still behind her, then his arms tightened. "Say it again," he whispered against her hair. Caroline turned to face him, reaching up to trace his jaw with gentle fingers. "I love you, Robert Dorian, not because you helped us or because you've been so amazing with Jade. I love you because you see me, really see me, because you let me be strong and vulnerable at the same time, because you make me feel safe enough to fall." His kiss was fierce and tender all at once, his hands coming up to frame her face. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright behind his glasses. "I love you too," he said, voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible." You walked into my life and suddenly everything made sense. From inside they heard Jade calling softly for water. Caroline started to move, but Robert held her for just a moment longer. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. When she looked surprised, he continued, "Not right away. When Jade's stronger, when you're both ready. But I want to wake up with you every morning. I want lazy Sundays and busy weekdays and everything in between. I want a life with you, Caroline Ellis. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes, but she was smiling. "Yes," she whispered. "To all of it. Yes." Jade called again, and this time they both went inside, hands linked. They found her sitting up in bed, scrolling through her phone. "Finally!" she exclaimed when she saw them. "I've been planning your wedding on Pinterest for the last 10 minutes. How do you feel about daisies for centerpieces?" "Jade!" Caroline laughed, but she didn't miss the way Robert's thumb stroked across her knuckles, or the soft look in his eyes when he glanced at her. "What? I'm just saying, when you know, you know." Jade's smile was knowing. "And you two? You definitely know." Later that night, after Robert had gone home with promises to bring breakfast in the morning, Caroline stood in her kitchen, looking at the evidence of the day: wine glasses in the sink, leftover mac and cheese in the fridge, Robert's sweater forgotten on her couch. Everything felt different, yet somehow exactly right. Her phone lit up with a text from Robert. "I miss you already, but knowing I get to love you tomorrow makes it bearable. Sweet dreams, my heart." Caroline hugged herself, feeling the fullness of joy in her chest. Through her window, Atlanta's nighttime skyline sparkled like stars brought down to earth, and she thought about how love sometimes comes quietly, in gentle steps and careful hands, in shared silences and borrowed sweaters, in the way someone looks at you like you're everything they've been waiting for. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, work dynamics to navigate, recovery schedules to manage, a future to plan. But tonight, Caroline Ellis stood in her kitchen and let herself feel completely, utterly happy. Because sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it's about finding someone who makes you feel brave enough to be exactly who you are. 3 weeks after Jade came home, life had fallen into a new rhythm. Caroline sat at her desk at Riverside Clinic, reviewing the day's appointments, while trying not to smile too obviously at the coffee cup Robert had left for her. He'd drawn a tiny heart next to her name, something he'd started doing after they'd said "I love you" that night on her balcony. The clinic staff had noticed the change between them, of course. It was in the little things, shared glances, gentle touches in passing, the way Robert's office door was always open when Caroline was nearby. They'd been professional about it, scheduling a meeting with HR to disclose their relationship, but rumors still circulated in whispered conversations and knowing smiles. "Dr. Dorian's in a really good mood lately," Anne commented that morning, giving Caroline a meaningful look. "Wonder why?" Caroline just smiled, focusing on her computer screen. She was learning to accept that their happiness wasn't something to hide, even if it did take some getting used to. The morning brought its usual parade of patients, routine checkups, vaccinations, minor emergencies. Caroline moved through it all with practiced efficiency, but now there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text from Jade. "Guess who just walked around the whole apartment building?" "Twice." Caroline grinned, showing the message to Robert when he passed her desk. His face lit up with genuine joy. "That's fantastic. We should celebrate. Dinner at my place tonight?" "Our place," she corrected softly. They'd started moving her things in gradually over the past week, with Jade's enthusiastic blessing. The apartment was slowly transforming into their shared space, her books mingling with his on the shelves, her favorite throw blanket on his couch, their coffee mugs side by side in the kitchen cabinet. Robert's eyes softened behind his glasses. "Our place," he agreed, voice warm. "I'll cook." The afternoon brought an unexpected challenge. A difficult client, a wealthy woman with an elderly cat, was demanding to see a real doctor, not just an assistant, when Caroline tried to help reschedule an appointment. "Ma'am, I understand your concern," Caroline began professionally, but the woman cut her off with a dismissive wave. "You clearly don't understand anything. Does Dr. Dorian know he hired such incompetent help?" Caroline felt the sting of the words, but before she could respond, Robert's voice came from behind her, cool and firm. "Actually, Mrs. Henderson, I hired Caroline because she's the most competent person I know, and I trust her judgment completely, both professionally and personally." The woman's eyes widened as Robert's hand came to rest supportively on Caroline's shoulder. The gesture was subtle but clear. They were a united front. After Mrs. Henderson left, suitably chastened, Caroline turned to Robert. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said simply. "Not just as your boss or your partner, but because it's true. You are extraordinary, Caroline Ellis, and I won't let anyone make you doubt that." She reached up to straighten his slightly crooked tie, letting her hand linger. "I love you," she whispered, low enough that only he could hear. His smile was soft and private. I love you too. Now about dinner. I was thinking that new recipe we saw. The rest of the afternoon passed smoothly. Caroline found herself watching Robert work, the gentle way he handled nervous pets, his patient explanations to worried owners, the quiet strength he brought to every situation. She loved him like this, in his element, doing what he was meant to do. At 5, they drove home separately. Maintaining some professional boundaries was important, they'd agreed. Caroline stopped to check on Jade, finding her sister surrounded by textbooks and social media posts. "I'm fine," Jade insisted when Caroline started fussing. "Go be with your man. I've got a Zoom study group anyway. You'll call if you need anything?" "Always do, sis." Jade's smile was knowing. "You deserve this happiness, you know. The way he looks at you, it's like you hung the moon or something." Caroline felt warmth spread through her chest. "He makes me feel like maybe I did." At their apartment, the word still gave her butterflies, Caroline found Robert in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, music playing softly as he chopped vegetables. He looked up when she entered, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. "Hi," he said softly, setting down the knife to pull her close. "Hi yourself," she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. He tasted like the wine he'd been cooking with, and his hands were warm on her waist. They cooked together, moving around the kitchen in perfect sync. Caroline told him about Jade's progress, and he shared stories about his day at the clinic. It was beautifully ordinary, yet somehow magical, this simple act of building a life together. After dinner, they sat on their balcony, watching the sunset paint Atlanta's skyline in shades of gold and pink. Caroline curled into Robert's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them content in the quiet. "I have something for you," he said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. "It's not, well, just open it." The small box held a key, simple and silver. "I know you already have one," he explained quickly, "but I wanted to give you this one properly, because this isn't just my home anymore, it's ours. You and me building something real." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes as she closed her hand around the key. "Something real," she echoed softly. "I've been thinking," Robert continued, his voice thoughtful, "about the clinic, about us. I want to make you practice manager." She looked up at him, surprised. "Robert, not because we're together," he said firmly, "because you're the best person for the job. You practically run the place already, and everyone respects you. It would mean a raise, more responsibility, and—" He paused, smiling slightly. "Technically, you wouldn't be directly reporting to me anymore." Caroline considered this. It was true, she'd been handling most of the management duties already, and the change would help address some of the professional complications of their relationship. "Are you sure?" she asked. Robert turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I'm sure about everything when it comes to you, Caroline Ellis. You make me better, as a doctor, as a man, as a person. And watching you grow, watching you embrace your strength and your worth, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they parted, both slightly breathless, the city lights were twinkling to life around them. "Yes," she said, "to the job, to building this life with you, to everything." Robert's smile was radiant. "Speaking of everything," he hesitated, then continued softly. "Jade mentioned that your lease is up next month." Caroline nodded, understanding where he was going. "Are you asking me to move in completely? No more gradual transition?" "I'm asking you to come home," he said simply, "all the way home." Later that night, as they lay tangled in their sheets, Caroline listened to Robert's steady heartbeat under her ear. On the nightstand, her new key caught the moonlight, and on her phone a text from Jade glowed. "Did he ask you yet? About moving in for real? Because I already started packing our stuff." Caroline smiled, snuggling closer to Robert's warmth. Outside, Atlanta hummed with nighttime energy, but here in this space they were creating together, everything was peaceful, perfect. "What are you thinking about?" Robert murmured sleepily, pressing a kiss to her hair. "About how love changes everything," she replied softly. "How it makes you brave enough to take chances, to believe in possibility, to trust that something beautiful can grow from the most unexpected moments." His arms tightened around her. "Keep talking," he whispered. So she did, her words painting pictures of their future in the darkness. A life built on trust and understanding, on quiet strength and open hearts, on the simple miracle of two people finding exactly what they needed in each other. Moving day dawned bright and clear, Atlanta's October sunshine warming the crisp autumn air. Caroline stood in her half-empty apartment, surrounded by labeled boxes and memories. Jade sat on a packed suitcase, directing the moving crew with cheerful authority, despite still needing to take frequent rest breaks. "You know," Jade said, watching Caroline stare at the empty walls, "when Mom died, you put your whole life on hold to take care of me. Maybe the universe was just waiting for the right moment to give you back everything you gave up." Caroline turned to her sister, throat tight with emotion. "You were never a burden, Jade." "I know," Jade smiled, her eyes wise beyond her years. "But now it's your turn to be happy, to build something for yourself." The sound of familiar footsteps in the hallway made both sisters look up. Robert appeared in the doorway, looking endearingly casual in jeans and a soft Henley, his glasses slightly askew from carrying boxes. "The truck's almost loaded," he announced, then paused, noting the emotion on Caroline's face. "Everything okay? Just having a moment," Caroline said, managing a smile. "Lot of memories in this place." Robert crossed the room to wrap his arms around her from behind, and Jade made an exaggerated awe sound that made them all laugh. "Ready to make new memories?" he murmured in Caroline's ear. Before she could answer, one of the movers called up from the street. They'd found an old photo album tucked away in a closet. Caroline went down to retrieve it, leaving Robert and Jade alone. "So," Jade said, fixing Robert with a serious look that reminded him startlingly of Caroline, "when are you going to ask her?" Robert blinked, then smiled slowly. "That obvious, huh? Please. I saw you checking your pocket at least 3 times today, unless you've got a really interesting piece of lint in there." Robert pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a stunning but understated ring, a princess-cut diamond flanked by small sapphires set in white gold. "Think she'll like it?" Jade's eyes welled up. "It's perfect. Simple but special, just like your love story." She wiped her eyes, laughing. "God, when did I get so sappy? Must be the post-surgery hormones." They heard Caroline's footsteps on the stairs, and Robert quickly tucked the ring away. But not before Jade whispered, "She's going to say yes, you know. She's never been happier than she is with you." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. By early afternoon, they were unlocking the door to their apartment. No longer just Robert's place with some of Caroline's things, but truly theirs. The movers efficiently brought up the boxes while Jade supervised from the comfort of the couch, already looking right at home. "I had something delivered," Robert said mysteriously, leading Caroline to the spare room they'd designated as her home office. Inside, she found a beautiful antique desk, solid wood, with intricate carvings and plenty of space for her work. "Robert," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "It's gorgeous. I thought you could use it for your practice manager duties," he said, watching her face. "And maybe for writing." Caroline looked at him in surprise. She'd never told him about her secret dream of writing children's books about rescue animals, but somehow he'd known. "Jade might have mentioned it," he admitted sheepishly. "She said you used to write stories for her when she was little, about brave animals finding their forever homes." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. "You remember everything, don't you?" "Everything about you?" "Yes." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because everything about you matters to me." They spent the afternoon unpacking, finding places for their merged lives. Caroline's coffee mugs nested perfectly with Robert's in the kitchen cabinet. Her medical textbooks from her vet tech certification courses lined up beside his more advanced volumes. Her colorful throw pillows brightened his neutral furniture. As evening approached, Jade announced she was going to visit her study group, giving them a knowing wink that made Caroline suspicious. But before she could question it, Robert was leading her to the balcony where he'd set up dinner, complete with candles and her favorite flowers. "When did you do all this?" she asked, amazed. "I have my secrets," he smiled, pulling out her chair. "Besides, our first real night living together should be special." They ate and talked and laughed, the city lights twinkling to life around them as the sun set. Robert seemed slightly nervous, his hand often straying to his pocket, but Caroline was too content to question it. After dinner, he put on music, the same slow jazz that had been playing the first time she'd come to his apartment, though under very different circumstances. He pulled her into his arms, swaying gently to the melody. "Do you remember that night?" he asked softly. "When you showed up at my door?" Caroline nodded against his chest. "I was so scared. Not of you, but of what I felt even then. I knew the moment I saw you that everything was about to change," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I just didn't know how completely you would transform my world." He pulled back slightly, and Caroline's breath caught at the look in his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket and dropped to one knee. "Caroline Ellis," he said, opening the velvet box to reveal the ring. "You walked into my life when I least expected it, but exactly when I needed you most. You showed me what real strength looks like, not the absence of fear, but the courage to feel everything deeply and still move forward. You taught me that love isn't just grand gestures and perfect moments, but also quiet mornings and gentle support, and choosing each other every single day. Tears were flowing freely down Caroline's cheeks now, but she couldn't look away from his earnest grey-blue eyes. I love the way you care for everyone around you, how you remember every patient's name at the clinic, how you light up when you talk about your dreams. I love your strength and your vulnerability, your morning coffee addiction, and your late-night thoughtfulness. I love every piece of who you are, and I want to spend the rest of my life discovering new things to love about you. He took a shaky breath. Will you marry me, Caroline? Will you build a forever with me? For a moment, Caroline couldn't speak through her tears. Then, with a laugh that was pure joy, she pulled him to his feet and into her arms. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes to forever. Yes to everything. The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, catching the city lights like captured stars. From inside the apartment, they heard a squeal of delight. Jade had never gone to her study group, of course. "Get out here," Caroline called, laughing through her tears. Jade burst onto the balcony, hugging them both at once. "Finally! I've been planning your wedding since the day you brought him home." As they celebrated together, family, love, future all wrapped up in one perfect moment, Caroline looked out at the Atlanta skyline. This city had seen her through so much: loss, struggle, fear, and now finally joy. Robert's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Happy?" he murmured. Caroline turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "More than I ever thought possible," she whispered, and kissed him under the stars, tasting forever on his lips. Spring sunshine filtered through the stained glass windows of the small chapel on the outskirts of Atlanta, casting rainbow patterns across Caroline's wedding dress. She stood before a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant woman reflected back at her. The dress was simple but elegant, ivory silk that flowed like water, with delicate lace details that reminded her of the flowers Robert always brought her. "Stop fidgeting with your hair," Jade scolded gently, reaching up to adjust a crystal pin in Caroline's carefully styled curls. "You look perfect." Caroline caught her sister's hand, squeezing it tight. Jade looked beautiful in her maid-of-honor dress, her health fully restored, her eyes bright with happiness. "I can't believe we're here," Caroline whispered. "I can," Jade replied with a knowing smile. "From the moment he brought those first daisies to my hospital room, I knew he was the one for you. Some love stories are just written in the stars." A soft knock at the door revealed Anne from the clinic, also dressed as a bridesmaid. "Everyone's ready," she announced, then paused, her eyes welling up. "Oh, Caroline, you look absolutely stunning." The small chapel was filled with people who had been part of their journey. Clinic staff, hospital workers who had cared for Jade, clients whose pets had brought them together. Even Mrs. Henderson was there, having become one of their strongest supporters after seeing their love story unfold. But most special of all were the four-legged guests. Luna, the golden retriever they had saved together, sat proudly near the front, wearing a flower collar and wagging her tail. Several other clinic regulars had been included, making the ceremony uniquely them. "Ready?" Jade asked softly, helping Caroline with her bouquet, a mixture of daisies and roses, simple and elegant like their love. Caroline took a deep breath, smoothing her dress one last time. "Ready." The music began, not the traditional wedding march, but a soft jazz piece that reminded them both of their first dance on the balcony. As the doors opened, Caroline's heart stopped for a moment. Robert stood at the altar, tall and handsome in his perfectly tailored suit, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. But it was his expression that brought tears to her eyes, pure love and wonder, like he was seeing the sun rise for the first time. Each step down the aisle felt like walking through their memories, past the spot where Luna's family sat, remembering the surgery that had brought them closer, past the clinic staff who had watched their love grow day by day, past the friends and family who had supported their journey. When she reached him, Robert's hands were trembling slightly as he took hers. "You're breathtaking," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The ceremony was personal and heartfelt. They had written their own vows, words that spoke of their unique journey from that unexpected night to this perfect day. "Caroline," Robert began, his grey-blue eyes intense behind his glasses, "you walked into my life on a night when we were both looking for something different than what we found. But sometimes the best love stories start in unexpected places. You taught me that strength isn't about standing alone, but about letting someone walk beside you. You showed me that love isn't just grand gestures, but morning coffee and gentle hands and quiet understanding. He squeezed her hands gently. I promise to love you in all the ways you deserve. With patience, with respect, with unwavering support. I promise to be your partner in everything, to face whatever comes together. I promise to remind you every day that you don't have to be strong alone anymore. And I promise to love you more than yesterday, but less than tomorrow, for all the days of our lives. Caroline blinked back tears as she began her vows. Robert, you came into my life when I thought I had to carry the weight of the world alone. You didn't try to take that weight from me. Instead, you showed me how to share it. You loved me not despite my struggles, but because of how I faced them. You saw me, really saw me when I thought I was invisible. Her voice grew stronger. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams as you've supported mine. I promise to love you in the quiet moments and the chaos, in the joy and the challenges. I promise to remember that love isn't about being perfect, but about being perfectly matched. And I promise to choose you every day in all the ways that matter. As they exchanged rings, a shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, painting them in rainbow colors from the stained glass. Jade would later swear it was their mother watching over them, blessing their union. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant announced, beaming. You may kiss the bride. Robert cupped Caroline's face with infinite tenderness, his thumbs brushing away happy tears before he kissed her. The chapel erupted in cheers and barks, making them both laugh against each other's lips. The reception was held in the clinic's renovated garden, their special place transformed into a fairyland of lights and flowers. They danced under the stars to the same jazz song that had played the night he proposed, surrounded by the people and animals that had brought them together. Happy? Robert murmured in her ear as they swayed. Caroline lifted her head from his chest to look into his beloved face. More than I ever dreamed possible, she whispered. This is just the beginning, isn't it? The beginning of forever, he agreed, kissing her softly. Later, as the evening wound down, they stood together on the clinic's back steps, the same steps where they had shared so many meaningful moments. Jade was dancing with her study group friends, her health and happiness a testament to their journey. Luna lay nearby, contentedly watching the celebration. You know what I think, Caroline said, leaning back against Robert's chest as his arms wrapped around her waist. What's that, Mrs. Dorian? The joy in his voice when he said her new name made her heart skip. I think sometimes the universe gives us exactly what we need, even when we're looking for something else entirely. That night, when I came to your door, I was looking for a way to save my sister. Instead, I found a way to save myself. I found you. Robert turned her in his arms, pressing his forehead to hers. You saved me too, he whispered. Every day since then, you saved me with your love, your strength, your beautiful heart. Above them, the Atlanta sky was full of stars, each one a promise of tomorrow. Music drifted from the garden, mixing with laughter and the occasional happy bark. Caroline wrapped her arms around her husband's neck, breathing in the moment. I love you, she said softly, more than yesterday. But less than tomorrow, he finished, and kissed her under the starlit sky. They had started their story in silence and shadows, in a moment of desperation and fate, but they would write the rest of it together, in sunlight and joy, in quiet moments and loud celebrations, in all the beautiful, ordinary days that make up a lifetime of love. Because sometimes the best love stories don't follow the expected path. Sometimes they start in the darkest moments and grow into something bright and beautiful. Sometimes they're written not in grand gestures, but in morning coffee and gentle hands, and the quiet ways we choose each other every single day. For Caroline and Robert, this wasn't just a wedding day. It was the beginning of their forever, a forever built on understanding, respect, and the kind of love that grows stronger with each passing day. A forever where they would face everything together, supporting each other's dreams, sharing each other's burdens, celebrating each other's joys. As they danced one last dance under the twinkling lights, surrounded by the people and animals that had brought them together, they both knew that this was just the first page of their next chapter, and it was going to be beautiful. 1 year later, the early morning sun streamed through the windows of the Riverside Veterinary Clinic, where Caroline Dorian sat at her desk, one hand resting unconsciously on her growing baby bump, while the other typed up the day's schedule. The clinic had expanded in the past year, adding new services and staff under her skilled management. But some things remained beautifully the same. Like clockwork, Robert appeared with her morning coffee, decaf now, much to her pretend annoyance, and pressed a kiss to her temple. "How are my girls doing this morning?" "Someone's been practicing her soccer moves since dawn," Caroline smiled, taking the cup. "I think she's going to be as energetic as her Aunt Jade." As if summoned by her name, Jade burst through the clinic doors, arms full of paperwork. Now in her final year of social work studies, she had started a program connecting rescue animals with children in therapy, using the clinic as her base of operations. The success stories lined the walls, photos of smiling kids with their furry friends, each one a testament to the healing power of love. "You're never going to believe what Luna did in her therapy session yesterday," Jade announced, dropping into a chair. The golden retriever, now the clinic's official therapy dog, wagged her tail at the mention of her name. Robert perched on the edge of Caroline's desk, his hand finding hers naturally. They listened as Jade described Luna's latest achievement, their fingers intertwined, wedding rings catching the morning light. The past year had brought so many changes, all of them beautiful. Their home had grown too, not just with the nursery they were preparing, but with the little pieces of their life together. Robert's medical journals now shared space with Caroline's growing collection of children's books. Her first story about a brave therapy dog was being published next month. The balcony where he'd proposed had become their favorite spot for morning coffee and evening talks, planning their future while watching the Atlanta sunset. "Oh, before I forget," Jade said, pulling out her phone, "Mrs. Henderson sent more baby clothes. I think she's determined to be this kid's honorary grandmother." Caroline laughed, remembering how the once difficult client had become one of their biggest supporters. "Did she include another note about how she knew we were perfect for each other before anyone else did?" "Of course," Jade rolled her eyes affectionately, "though I still claim best matchmaker status, even if it was accidental." Robert squeezed Caroline's hand. "Nothing about us was accidental," he said softly, "just perfectly timed." The morning bustle of the clinic began around them, staff arriving, phones ringing, pets and their humans filling the waiting room. Caroline stood, smoothing her dress over her bump, ready to start another day of the life they'd built together. "I love you," Robert murmured, pulling her close for a moment. "More than yesterday." "But less than tomorrow," she finished, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Jade made a theatrical gagging sound. "You two are still disgustingly cute. Thank goodness my niece will have me to balance out all this romance." As they moved into their daily routine, Caroline caught glimpses of their journey in every corner of the clinic. The desk where she'd first noticed Robert's gentle hands with injured animals, the break room where they'd shared countless quiet moments, the garden where they'd celebrated their wedding. That evening, as they sat on their balcony watching the sunset, Robert's hand resting protectively on her belly, Caroline thought about how love grows, how it starts in unexpected moments, takes root in gentle gestures, blooms in quiet understanding, how it multiplies with each passing day, making room for more joy, more dreams, more love. "What are you thinking about?" Robert asked, pressing a kiss to her hair. "About how some endings are really beginnings," she replied, smiling as their daughter kicked against his palm, "and how sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that surprise us." The Atlanta skyline glowed golden in the fading light, a backdrop to their continuing story. Their love had started in an unexpected moment of fate, grown through challenges and joy, and now was expanding to welcome new dreams, new life, new adventures. Because that's what real love does. It grows, changes, deepens. It builds homes in hearts and creates families in unexpected ways. It turns ordinary moments into memories and simple choices into lifetimes. For Caroline and Robert, their story was still being written one day at a time in morning kisses and evening talks, in shared dreams and quiet understanding, in all the ways they chose each other, again and again. And always loving each other more than yesterday, but less than tomorrow. The end. If you could change just one moment in Caroline and Robert's love story, what would it be? The unexpected meeting at the apartment door, the night he supported her during Jade's surgery, or perhaps the moment when he defended her in front of her difficult client. Which moment do you think was the most decisive in turning a chance encounter into true, deep love? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.